for YouTube, and as soon as it does, I'll turn that sound off, and then we'll get started. You learn these things, you know, after you do them about 10 times. I'll turn that sound up. There it is. Okay. So we're live on YouTube. For you guys that are watching on YouTube, welcome. And everyone else, welcome to Pure Presence, our book club that is, it's non-dual in the teaching, and it's really because of Rupert Spira that we're connecting with Jean Klein. We'll probably do a couple of books in Jean Klein and then go back to some of Rupert's content. And maybe we'll do Francis Lucille, but we're going to stay in that quadrant of teaching because I feel that this is a place for the pure essence of the non-dual teaching as it's presented by Rupert and his mentors and teachers. And the co-hosts are all of that same, really devotion and attention there. And welcome everyone, and welcome Jenny Beal back to being co-host with me on this awesome book study club that has sort of emerged and evolved and is so much fun. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Bill.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And so this week we're in what I call chapter 6, He Who Longs to Know. And the mic is all yours, Jenny. I'm going to just invite you to just sort of lead the way and be our guide.
Okay. Well, if you don't mind, Bill, I'd like to say a little bit in general about Jean Klein's approach to teaching first, and then actually start with chapter 7 and go back to chapter 6. And there is a reason for that, which will become obvious a bit later on, I think. Okay.
That's great.
Is that all right then?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, although the teaching obviously is the same because Rupert comes from that same lineage, Jean Klein's approach is a little bit different, and it was very fortuitous, really, because at Buckland Hall I had a chat with a friend over coffee who had actually been a student of Jean Klein and gone to his meetings. And so I was able to ask him what it was like. What was Jean Klein like? What were the meetings like? How were they different from the meetings that we were having with Rupert at Buckland Hall? And my friend explained that really it was a different style of teaching because Jean Klein taught mainly from feeling. He didn't elaborate things intellectually in huge amounts of detail. His answers to questions were very much in feeling rather than in words. And it was almost as though the words were irrelevant when you were sitting there, he said. And interestingly, if you watch his recordings on YouTube, there are not that many recordings of Jean Klein, but there are a few. You can actually sense that. So there are long pauses in which you feel the meaning coming to rest in the listener, in the person who asked the question. Very, very long pauses. Rupert has very long pauses in his meditations, but when he answers questions, he tends to go into a lot of detail, and there often aren't long pauses, except perhaps at the beginning. So Jean Klein's books are mostly transcripts of his meetings, but as you'll have seen in the preface, this book is slightly different because it has been entirely reworked at a much later date to make it clearer as a book. But nonetheless, those who are used to Rupert's writing style and used to his meetings can sometimes find it difficult. because this is very, very concise, and it's left to the readers to do almost all of the exploration for themselves. So whether that's a good idea, or whether it's better to be very, very clear and explicit, as Rupert is, I don't know. I think there are arguments both ways, really. But I love Jean Klein's words, because he leaves you with nothing to hang on to. I would have loved to have been there with my friend, listening to him. But so there's no danger of turning his teaching into a religion with sort of stock phrases and sayings that really close off the inquiry. Because I mean, what happens is that sometimes people have glimpses of their true nature, and then they kind of superimpose the words of the teacher on those glimpses, and those glimpses are then described by those words, and any other words they find it difficult to come to terms with. But the problem with ascribing words to experience is that you're conceptualizing your experience as an object, and it's not helpful to do that. Francis tries to get around that by using verbs rather than nouns. So he talks about consciousnessing rather than consciousness, which is interesting, but it feels a bit clumsy in a way, I guess. But any stock phrase from Jean Klein that you can come up with is always enigmatic. It's always full of ambiguity and apparent paradox. So things like live in not knowing, or wait without waiting. And even ordinary words have really rather different meanings. And for example, listening in Jean Klein's writing is not done with the ears. It's a kind of wide open alertness, openness to all experience. And silence is not absence of thoughts, and it's not absence of sounds. It's the ever-present silence in which all thoughts and sounds arise. And again, stillness is not absence of activity. It's that which underlies all activity. So he uses those words in quite a different way, and it's more akin to poetry in some sense. And I was talking to Annika yesterday on Skype, and she too felt that reading it felt like poetry, and it does to me too. So I hope that will help people to tune in a little bit to the way he writes. And so the reason I wanted to start with chapter 7 is because that is actually where he talks about the way he teaches, and he explains it a bit. Read just a little bit, which I think is his way of explaining what I've just said. Words.
I love, before you go there, I just want to say thank you for that background, because I want to go back and listen to it again. In fact, I want to transcribe it and read what you just stated. I think that's a valuable piece of the experience in reading from here on. It really will bring us closer to the author. And I appreciate that. And then also one thing, if you could tilt your laptop camera down just a little bit so we can see more of your face in the center, that would be great.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, sorry. Okay.
All right, perfect.
Right.
Right. Please go on.
Yes. So I wanted to read a little bit from near the beginning of chapter 7 from page 49. Words are but a very pale reflection of the inexplicable self, and communication by words must never become a limitation. The teaching is only a pretext to bring the disciple to a new quality of listening, a listening that is totally open, receptive, and free from any concept or anticipation. This openness in the listener's own true nature. This openness is the listener's own true nature, stillness, ultimate knowledge. And I thought the word pretext was interesting there. The teaching is only a pretext, and that was how it felt when I was watching recordings from some of his meetings. It felt like the words were a pretext. They weren't important. That what was important was the connection, that unspoken connection with the people listening.
Yeah, and the transmission is the known experience, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. The words are not important. Describing it is not important. All that's important is taking the questioner and perhaps others in the room to where Jean Klein is himself, to share that same space.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
And he goes on, learning things objectively is always a fragmentary process. The guru passes on the knowledge of truth in its totality, for he and his teachings are one. Simply by his or her presence, the teacher helps, because this presence reminds the seeker of his own presence, which he is, in common with the teacher, and in which all existence appears. Unintentional reminders of totality will thus come about, and the disciple will be attracted by them. I thought that such a beautiful description of what it's like to be there, because that is the same with Rupert. When I ask a question to Rupert, it feels the same as that.
Yes. Yes. He's so present,
Yes.
and generous with the answers until they're completed.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, there's no agenda. Doesn't like how many people can speak. It's like, okay, when this one's finished, we'll be finished. And he's so present. That's just beautiful. It is this same description.
Yes, and he waits until he feels that the questioner has reached that same place, that same understanding, and that's quite miraculous, I think.
We're so fortunate to have access to, Rupert is like a Jean Klein. He's like a Ramana Maharshi. He's like a Nisargadatta. He is a teacher of an evolved understanding that we're learning directly from.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then later on in that chapter, Jean Klein talks about the concept of me being the chief obstacle to fulfillment, and he explains it in a slightly different way from Rupert, which I think is interesting. He said the concept is really an afterthought, which comes in following a moment between thoughts or desires, and then lays claim to the feeling of happiness, creating a subject-object relation. I am happy, or equally, I am unhappy. And the same applies to choice. When that video that we often post on your Facebook page about choice, and Rupert's example, I chose coffee, and it's it's the me that comes in afterwards and said, I chose coffee.
Right.
And Jean Klein, not in this book, I don't think, but in some of his other books, describes it as the clown coming onto the stage and taking the bow after the ballerina has finished her performance.
Yeah, that's funny. And that's the way it is too. I mean,
It is.
it is the way it is, and it goes even a little more into that. I remember having a conversation with Lisa, my wife, at one time, and a couple of years ago, and all of a sudden, right at the tail end of a conversation, this smart ass remark came in, kind of a dig, and it's like surprised both of us. And I said, "Did you see that?" She said, "Yeah, I saw that." The mind comes right in and takes and wants to like start take over the thought system, the conversation.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Yes,
it
it
definitely
owns
does
it.
take the bow for anything that is like, oh, look what I did. I see what I did.
Yes, yes. And yeah, later in the chapter, he goes on to talk about the Vedantic approach, the neti approach of separating out everything that we are not, and leaving just the unnameable knower of experience, devoid of all personal content. And but he points out that that's really just an interim stage, that ultimately there's a collapse of the distinction between the knower and the known, and he describes that as happening in a flash of understanding. And the key to that collapse is what he calls non-directed attention, and Rupert describes that as attention sinking back into its source, but he calls it non-directed attention.
Yeah, yeah. It's great when you can get two teachers to say things pointing to the same idea in a different way, so that you can hear it in a different way.
Yes, and it can also be a test of your understanding if you've been just with one teacher, and then you come to Jean Klein, because um, they say traditionally in the Hindu traditions that everyone who has realized their true nature will describe their experience differently, but all will understand each other perfectly. And so it's a test of a level of understanding as well, if you read things from other teachers. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Well, anything else on chapter 7, on what we call chapter 7?
Yes, there's a lovely, it's really just one sentence, but the whole paragraph is beautiful, about going away from beliefs, ideas, and concepts, and just listening to the body and feelings, and being open to them, present in them. And he says everything surrounding you is included in this global listening, and ultimately there's no longer a listener and something listened to. And that's listening in the sense that I mentioned earlier, not just listening with the ears, but that sort of total alertness and openness to all experience.
Yes. I like the listening is the greater value. It listening without the body's ears, but listening in the way he's describing it, and the feeling and the alertness, like you said, a few minutes ago. Listening is is it's almost like uh, 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 it's one of the abilities that this understanding offers that
Mm.
brings you to an experience of where you're just where you can be in joy no matter what situation, whatever is occurring. You're in that listening of being, and it doesn't get disturbed by the giving attention to the experience. It doesn't
Yes, yes,
change.
exactly.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
And yes, as you say, it's listening with the whole body. It's listening to your sensations. It's listening to the sounds that are around, but it's listening to the seeing that is around.
yes,
Sort of not superimposing anything on that seeing, just allowing seeing to be present.
yes.
And it's beautiful.
Mm,
There's a bit about this. I might read that actually because I really like it. Um, he says for most people, attention is only understandable as concentration directed towards something, or as deriving from the attraction of an object. The stress we put on the object that interests us creates the illusion of a continuity. Non-directed attention enables the object to melt into silent stillness, the ultimate non-dual consciousness, which is the background of all apparent duality. And that is listening. That's really what he means by
mm.
listening, I think.
Yes,
Yes. So
yes,
there's nothing sort of formulaic about this listening. There's nothing to grab hold of or even talk about. It's something we experiment with and experience for ourselves. And all the time, that's what he's encouraging you to do.
mm, yeah, yeah. What came in when you were saying that is it's an unattached listening.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah. No likes and dislikes, or this is good and this is bad.
Yeah,
It's it's beautiful.
yeah,
um
yeah.
and yeah, and
It remains open. It remains open, an open space, so that truth or uh, consciousness can inform from this place, or do or nothing.
yes, yes, it can be just openness to pure enjoyment. And you've been on Rupert's retreats, and you know that a lot of the time there's just pure enjoyment, isn't there? Nothing really going on, just pure enjoyment.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So good. Yeah.
yeah.
There was a statement in here that I was wasn't it was kind of interesting. Did it say that God, oh, here it is. When talking of spiritual matters, what is your idea of God?
Mm.
I thought that was an interesting question and answer.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
It is a concept, he said, that God is a concept. I totally get that.
Mhm.
I love Rupert's language of it. God is a religious name for what can't be named or what
Yeah,
has no name, right?
yes, yes,
And then he goes on in the next page. I think he says that he says more about God. He says there is only God. So it's sort of almost like a paradox. God is a concept, and yet there is only God, right?
yes, yeah. Mm.
And then he goes into saying what is the questioner says, what is a concept, an idea, or a thought? And what is a thought? An image evoked by visual, auditory, tactile memory, an object. Are all thoughts object? Yes, except the thought I am.
Yes. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's pretty cool. I went back to when I read that, I thought, except for the thought I am. Yeah, because that is can't be objectified. And then of course I love Annika's doorway thing where it's I on one side and am on the other side.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, I
Yes.
is eternal, so to speak, symbolically, and am is when we or when the I goes into time and space.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. Yes. A lovely diagram, that
yeah,
one.
beautiful. Yes, you could
Yes.
sell that. You could make a beautiful picture out of that. You could sell that, Annika. It's not mine. Okay, that's funny. Well, it is. It's you gave it to me, so it was yours before it was mine. Oh, good.
Yes.
Okay, what else do we have, Jenny?
Oh, just one more thing on that chapter that I really like, the page 54, nearly at the end.
Okay.
Again about objects. Living is an absolutely non-objectifiable continuum, an ever-present now. All thought, feeling, and sensation spring spontaneously from this living. Consciousness does not depend on the absence of thought or sensation. Do not emphasize the absence of objects. Emphasize only the presence of consciousness, life. And I think that's so important, because sometimes people feel it's necessary to turn away from the world and to quiet the mind and spend many hours in meditation to stop thoughts, try to stop thoughts. You can't really stop thoughts. But Jean Klein makes it very clear in that that's a complete misunderstanding. There's no reason to do that.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna, after we're finished today, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna sit with this whole paragraph, this question, and what you just read, because it's just it's a very valuable, helpful idea to just sit with, and this is a living experience. It's the living experience that's so beautiful when it's unattached, because then it doesn't have then there's no upsets in it involved. There's no investment in an outcome, and I also it seems like Rupert speaks from this place also when he talks about whenever you're on one of his webinars and someone, no matter what the issue or question is, he takes them right back to the awareness of the experience.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. And that seems to be what Jean Klein is saying right here also.
Exactly, yes. And it's lovely, Bill, because that there's so much in every sentence of this book. Every sentence you can actually sit with and contemplate and really feel the depth of it, and really explore it in your experience. There's
Yeah.
so much there. We
So
can only
good.
we can only cover a little bit of the depth, in one.
I know. I know. It keeps it so fresh and alive. I'm getting so much out of these book clubs that it's just keeping it more fresh, more alive in my experience. I just love it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So shall we go on to chapter 6 now? Go back to
Yes,
chapter
yes,
6 now.
yes.
So,
And so now you did this. You did this intentionally. You went to 7 first, and did you say why?
um, yes, the reason why was because I was talking at the beginning about how he teaches, and then 7 really starts with his method of
Okay.
teaching. So I thought that would help
Yes.
to then understand chapter 6, because uh, chapter 6 contains an
Yes.
awful lot
Yes.
uh, uh, of ideas that you really need to sit with for a while. They're not always obvious. Sometimes we can allow things to float over us and say, "Oh yes, I get that. That's okay." But when we really sit with it, we think, "Well, do I really get that? Is that really right?" And we go more deeply into it, and I think that's the best way to approach Jean Klein. I think,
Yes. Well,
yeah,
and I have to say, I have a huge respect for the way you approach this content and the background that you brought in about Jean Klein is the background is it did need to go to those ideas that were in 7 before 6 because you brought the background in first, and that was very helpful. Now we'll go into the content of 6, which is also there's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot in
yeah,
6, but that sort of, even though it's almost like it belonged in the flow, and there's not this isn't a linear publication. It's essays that were compiled, and so you picked up on that just because your view or your understanding is broad enough so that you saw that and you saw the value of it. So thank you for that.
right. So we'll go back to 6
Yes.
now, and so in that chapter he starts by saying that since what we are is constant and unchanging, it can't be experienced in subject-object relation. That's a slightly different form of argument from the one which Rupert uses, but it's interesting to see it in that way, and to feel it in that way. So if we think in terms of me and the world, then that's duality, and we've created an ego through that thought.
Mm.
And he explains that ego, or that separate self, is maintained through memory, and it's memory that creates our idea of the world. So it's a lovely sentence, not from this book, but from Transmission of the Flame, which is actually my favorite book. It's a bigger book. It's beautiful, which is live in not knowing, free from memory. And it's very, very beautiful, but it needs it needs a lot of contemplation. It needs a lot of understanding, and bringing your experience to it. But I
Mhm.
maybe just read a little bit about what he says about memory. Is images arise and fade away in the mirror of consciousness, and memory creates the illusion of a continuity. Memory is but a mode of thinking. It's purely transitory. On such an unsteady basis, we construct a whole world of characters. This illusion hinders clear seeing.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot in that, but it's interesting to see what would actually happen if we did try to live entirely without memory, because it's not obvious what he really means by that. And if you take it literally, then it's actually not possible. There was some years ago, there was a very sad documentary I saw, it was about an eminent British musician and conductor called Clive Waring. But I think this was actually shown in the States as well. And this guy lost virtually all of his memory through a virus infection, which went up to the brain. And he could remember only the last few seconds. So the documentary, the one which I think is available in the US, it's called something like The Man with the 7-Second Memory. I mean, he could sometimes remember up to 20 seconds, but it was somewhere between 7 and 20 seconds was all he could remember. And that whole film and that whole documentary showed the complete impracticality of living without memory. The difficulties of relationships with his wife, who was devoted but had really a very, very hard time, and relationships with other friends. Just his ability as a musician was impaired by it, obviously. And he had to be, I mean, he couldn't be trusted to go out, because how would he find his way back? And had to be cared for in a nursing home. So it's sort of easy to read what Jean Klein says and let it float over you, thinking, oh, I understand that. But it's necessary to look much more deeply, and we need to discover in ourselves what he's really referring to. And my understanding of this, which I think he explains a little bit more in Transmission of the Flame, is that he's really talking about psychological memory, because it's obvious that we need functional memory for the ordinary functions of living. Getting up in the morning, going to meetings on time, preparing meals, meeting friends, all of that sort of thing. But what we don't need is the memory created concept of a me. Or for that matter, the memory created concepts of of all the people that we meet and all the friends that we have.
Right. And also there's it's almost like there's the habit of picking up the past and making it a present experience, or picking up the past about people, about situations, and bringing that whole event into right now and missing right now.
Exactly. And one of the things that several of Jean Klein's students said about him was that every time you met him, he greeted you and he talked to you as if he had met you for the first time, and that was what was so different about him. And that's such a beautiful way to live and relate.
Yes. So it seems like it's a gift when you see autistic characters that are like, I think Dustin Hoffman he was Rain Man. He was an
Yes.
autistic character in that, and it was like he was totally present, no filter, and he was that kind of you got the present moment every time you spoke to him. Yeah, and I think you get that with Rupert also.
Yes, yes, you do.
Yeah.
But it was interesting. I had a talk to Rupert about that whole idea at Buckland Hall, and he said, well, yeah, yes, sometimes there are times when you don't want to spend more time with people, and you are using memory in that sense, but you're not. You're always giving them space to express something different. But no, if you don't want to spend time with them, then you don't lie to them, but you find a way of getting out of it in a nice way. But
Yeah.
no problem with using memory in that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because he's often said to people, be careful how you choose your friends.
Well, there's another kind of a thought that goes with that. If you're living from this place, then maybe you don't choose your friends. They're chosen for you in the experience of your evolution. And what I've noticed is that people that don't belong in your vibration, they can't hang around very long. They say, this is crazy land. You know what I mean?
I think that happens quite a lot, but just occasionally. I was having breakfast with Rupert once, and he said to me, "How is it that you always seem to attract these really weird, dysfunctional people?" and
He's talking to you.
yes, talking to me,
That's funny.
and because he's come across some of them, and um, they've gone to his meetings in Oxford and sometimes been quite difficult and even rude. And so he's known about this, but he's made it quite clear that maybe it's more sensible to choose friends a bit more carefully. But they still, I mean, some they want to spend time with me, but I limit I limit the time if they're really paranoid or agitated, and because it affects affects me, and it affects Richard and anyone else.
Well, I had this conversation with Lisa this morning. It seems like, I mean, that this divine intelligence, this presence, and we just talked about it a few minutes ago. The mind comes in and says, "Oh yeah, I did that. Oh yeah, that was my idea." But the truth is that there is the beingness of transmission, the presence I is more and more uh, obvious in the directions that we take. And I remember, Lisa and I did a conference call last night. We had a woman. She was, I think, 75 years old, and she was talking about this interaction with a young man that was she was talking about everything she sees. She just sees beauty in it. I saw this young man, and yesterday, and he didn't have a car. He asked me if I could give him a ride, and I'm going, no, I'm not comfortable with that. She saw the beauty of him, but wisdom came in and intuited to her, that's not a good idea to give this person a ride. It might not be, but it wasn't there. She said there was no judgment on it. It was not a label that she gave to him. It just, the informing came in, and it comes in intuitively as a divine idea in my mind. That's one of the gifts that we have.
Yes, I think that's right. That well, as Rupert says, you follow your happiness.
Yeah. And Hillary just mentioned something that's on 45 that I really love. It says, when you look at the world with wholeness, the world will change you. You are the world in you.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
That's so accurate. And when we vibe in a new understanding, it seems like the outward picture is going to is going to give us, at least our interpretation is going to be different.
Yes. I've a year or so ago, I started practicing something called mixang, which is contemplative photography. Rupert said, "Can't you find something more creative to do in your spare time, rather than looking after a lot of people who had psychological problems, which I'm not competent to deal with. That was what I did, and it's very beautiful because it comes from a very similar background to Rupert's yoga meditations. Everything is always starting from being aware of being aware, and not seeing anything as an object, but allowing seeing to come to you. And one of the main principles there is that there's beauty in everything, or everything is beauty, and there's nothing that's not worth photographing. There's nothing that's bad. There's nothing that's ugly. And one of my assignments for my mixing teacher, I took a photograph of a piece of litter lying beside the road. It was a plastic bag. You wouldn't know from the photograph that was it, because it was just part of a plastic bag, but it had beauty in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, the world does change, and you change too, because you also are the world. The world is your body, and it's there are all sorts of approaches you can use for that. You can use Rupert's yoga meditations equally.
Yeah. And I love this idea because it really does give answer to the outcome, the results of the seeker that finds understanding, that discovers understanding and truth, and really does and can have and does have a better experience in time and space in this bodysuit, with clarity of our true identity, and being the being is the truth of what everything is, and not the physical matter experience that's happening.
Yes, it's just letting everything, letting all experience flow through you unimpeded. It just allowing it to flow, not catching hold of it and laying claim to any of it, or judging any of it, allowing the body mind to respond, but to respond from openness and in accordance with the situation.
Yes.
I think that's what Jean Klein is saying in this chapter.
Yeah. I like at the top of 45, I put 2 asterisks on these 3 sentences. It says, when the accent is on being aware and not on thought nor on perception, we gradually become deeply relaxed, both on the neuromuscular level and on the mental plane.
Yes, and yes, you feel that. Yeah. Yes. It's interesting. A lot of progressive paths start with the relaxation, and then try to find that abiding as awareness. But in fact, if you start with the abiding as awareness, the relaxation follows automatically, and it works the other way around. Well, it's both ways around, of course. Yeah.
Well, the difference that I've noticed is that the direct path gives you an undeniable reference, and it gives you an undeniable reference and your own experience for the experience that is occurring, where the progressive path is more mental, and you don't really have proof. You don't really have your own direct experience of the proof of the I, or the I am, which once you have the direct experience of the proof, it's like, okay, then illusory thoughts or ephemeral experiences, they dissolve by definition in the light that is shining on it.
Yes, yes, that's absolutely right. It happens automatically, whereas on a progressive path, you are trying different exercises, different practices in order to make it happen. We don't need to make anything happen on the direct path, because things happen by themselves. They work beautifully by themselves.
Yes. Well, I will say that I still love the Course in Miracles. It's like a love song. It's like poetry to me, especially when I can go in there with the understanding of the direct path. It takes me so much deeper into the language where I'm just cutting all the stuff out that's dualistic, and I'm really going in and having this. It's almost like this fresh content is nourishing my understanding in a deeper way.
Yes, I felt the same thing about the Shankaracharya's teaching and about Ouspensky's teaching, and I know that Rupert has too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, what else would you like to share on this chapter, Jenny? We have about 10 minutes left.
Right. Okay. Yes, I think this part, what you take to be, this is on page 44, well, what you take to be reality is only a concept arising from memory. Memory arises from the mind from the witness from the self. You are the witness, the onlooker standing on the bank, watching the river flow on. You do not move. You are changeless, beyond the limits of time and space. You cannot perceive what is permanent because you are it. And that's very beautiful, because it corresponds with what Rupert says about tracing your way back to that which is aware of your experience. Yeah.
Is that verse that he uses where he talks about going down, down, down?
Yes, from Rumi, go down and down and down in ever widening rings of being. And the ever widening is important as well. It's not just the sinking down; it's the widening out to encompass everything.
Yes, yes.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love this. I love this that sentence that you read. Memory arises from the mind from the witness from the self. You are the witness, the onlooker standing on the bank, watching the river flow on.
Yes.
And when you have this, when you just be that, it's peaceful. It brings it brings a state of just you're good. You're good right here. This
Yes.
is good. This is easy.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And then when you see that knower, which is the witness of the experience, that's the knower of the known, and you see that the distinction between that knower and what's known is completely artificial. You can feel it as being something that's been superimposed by the mind. Then he says there's no longer any room for a witness of experience, but that's something that happens kind of automatically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But have you? I mean, I know you've been on this direct path much longer than I have, and I am noticing for myself that I don't know, something is getting a lot clearer. All of a sudden, it's just like an understanding is occurring where it's just more. It just seems easier. The understanding is easier. To read Rupert or Jean Klein or the Course in Miracles, it just seems like okay. It just has it's like the person Bill is being affected by all of this content that's being connected to.
Well, the way I would see it, Bill, is that the person Bill is gradually being dissolved into all the content that you have been absorbing over the past few years. That's how it
Yes.
feels to me, anyway. And I think that's what happens. We allow things to flow, and the more they flow unimpeded, the more we listen to this content, and really listening in Jean Klein's sense, feeling it. We're within ourselves. The more that happens. Sometimes people think that self-inquiry has to come to an end after an understanding of your true nature, but I don't think so. And Rupert once said that he hoped it never came to an end, that there would always be some kind of inquiry, there would always be more depths to be explored. And I think this book is very good for helping us do that, because Jean Klein is using words in a different way and a different style of teaching, and I think it I think it helps, and I think its poetic quality also helps very much.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah. Yes. Well, we have about 4 minutes left. I'm going to leave it. I'm going to let you kind of close whatever you would like to share for this gathering.
Right. Okay. Yes, there's a bit on page 43 that I think is really quite important, and it's about what we were talking about earlier.
Okay.
One who has reached full maturity, who knows himself in consciousness, will not necessarily conform with social convention. Such a one will act at the right moment as the situation dictates, without anybody being hindered in any way. If your acts are dictated by your desires, you have no freedom whatsoever. On the other hand, if you do what the situation calls for, you do what is right, and you and your surroundings are free. I think that's really beautiful.
That is
That's amazing.
that is poignant, and it comes right in to yes, right? It comes into
Yeah.
a yes. I love this.
Yes.
It's to be your authentic self from this place of awareness, from this place of understanding, and it works for everyone involved. It works for the good of all.
Yes, exactly. And you find that the body mind just acts in the way it acts. You don't even know, the mind doesn't even know what the body is going to do before it does it. It just does it, and everything feels more effortless. Living feels more effortless. I think.
Mm, yeah.
Could I read
Wow.
one more thing,
Yes.
just to end with, because this is so lovely. It's on page 47.
Great. Please do. Thank you.
That which surges forth unexpectedly on the spur of the moment, without any cause, free from the past, that which springs forth without roots, and neither flowers nor fades. That which is most natural, free from strain, is the self.
Nice. So good. It's so good. Thank you for that. And thank you for being today's co-host and a friend to all of us. Jenny, we totally appreciate you and we love you. And thank you for being part of this group. Thank you all for joining with us today. And we'll be back on July 3rd with Andrea Fraze. And Jenny, give my love to Richard. I love your husband. I don't know him in person, but
I will.
love the energy of his when he starts you out, gets you connected. I just love him. And thank you all for being with us. Thank you, Jenny. And I'll see you again for sure as a co-host on the 17th of July. And I'll be back from the Camino on July 3rd.
Thank you, Bill. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's been lovely being here, as it always is. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great. Bye-bye, everyone.